I'm Niall Paterson, and on this special edition of the Sky News Daily, we'll be taking a look back at 2023 in politics. Yep, look, unlike 2022, we certainly didn't have three separate prime ministers. There were no lettuces, there was no economy-wrecking mini-budget, but we certainly had plenty of twists and turns. Here to hold my hand and walk me through the trauma, our political editor, Beth Rigby, who, I should state, for those of you who are listening and not watching, is very remarkably Christmassy in her choice of attire. That is a very spangly top.
I am wearing one of my Christmas jumpers. I am fully in Christmas mode for this occasion, and Neil just doesn't have the memo.
Yeah, I can tell. Demob happy, I would say. Let's start, as we should, in 2023 with the government. And at least we have a list of pledges on which to judge Rishi Sunak. Having inflation, growing the economy, bringing down national debt, sorting out NHS waiting lists and stopping the boats. Has he had any success?
He has had some success, Neil, and I liked your intro a lot. And, you know, when you were going through the kind of various car crashes that we were watching in slow-mo last year.
I'm still traumatised.
But this year also has been full of drama. I mean, it has not been the sort of boring, stable government, if you like, that maybe people thought Rishi Sunak might bring to number 10.
That he promised.
It was meant to be steadying the ship. The polls were meant to close. The gap between the parties was meant to close. He's meant to bring order. Anyway, we can get into all of that. But you're right. He kicked off the year. And I remember it well because it was before Parliament had come back and we'd just done Christmas. And you know, because you've got a little boy, you know how full on Christmas are. And then Rishi Sunak kicked off the year, the first week of Jan. We're all meant to be recovering from Christmas. And he announced these big 5 pledges. This was his big, this is who I am as Prime Minister. This is my promise to the country. And where have we got to through the year? It's a very mixed bag.
We've had some positive movement on inflation.
Yes, so we've got this great pledge tracker on Politics Hub, little plug there. Did you see what I did?
Check
the guy that runs that's given me 10 quid for that, Neil. But like, where are we? Inflation, it's in the green. He's achieved that. Inflation has halved to where it was in January. It's 4.6% as of October. So that's a big tick. The next one, the economy, work in progress, I would say. It hasn't grown in the 3 months to October. There is an expectation that the final quarter of the calendar year will see a bit of uptick in
When you can always expect there to be more spending.
Yeah, so he can maybe claim that next year. Reduced debt, no, it's rising relative to GDP. And then there's the two that I would argue are the more retail end of the offer. That is on the NHS and on stopping the boats. And on both of those, I would say they are very much, actually, on the NHS, it was very much in the red zone. That pledge is, I don't think I can say this with some confidence. I don't think he's going to hit that pledge.
But he would say, well, the reason for that is the doctors, it's the nurses, they're striking.
Well, the counter-argument to make to that is, as Prime Minister, if that is your pledge and you've got a series of strikes, maybe don't make that pledge, don't choose that to be one of your 5 things, or try and do a deal with the doctors and nurses. Because the fact is that I think waiting lists were about 7.2 million when he made the pledge. They're now at 7.75 million. And the latest thing I saw from the King's Fund, which is a think tank that covers the health service, I think they're saying it's going to get to about 8 million in the summer. So that, I would argue, was a pretty foolhardy pledge to make. It really matters to people, right? Because it's their hip operation or it's a non-emergency of an operation that they need. And that's a very tangible frustration for people. And then stop the boats.
Well, this is the one I think we're going to spend a bit of time talking about because
just us, Neil.
Well, the entire nation, apparently cannot talk of anything else, according to the Prime Minister. Maybe you'll have a view on that. But I suppose, as well as stopping the small boats crossing the Channel, this does also play into immigration policy in general. 2023, of course, the year in which we hit record highs in terms of net migration, a figure approaching 750,000 people coming to this country. Why is the Conservative government in such a mess over migration, legal or otherwise?
I mean, you and I have talked quite a lot about this, and I think there's a couple of things to say. I think that Rishi Sunak made Stop the Boats, illegal migration, one of his 5 pledges, so it rapidly rose up the agenda. Now, his advisors would say, well, there was no option because it matters to voters, and it particularly matters to Conservative voters. So say it's in the top 3 of many voters' concerns. With many Conservative voters, you'll find it's their top concern, right? So it's partly I can't ignore this issue because I will suffer at the polls if I ignore this issue. I think the second longer term reason for this is that the whole drive of take back control, the mantra of the 2019 election on which Boris Johnson sailed to victory with an 80-seat majority, was about controlling borders. And the Conservative Party made a pledge in that 2019 manifesto that it would get net migration down below, I think it was about 250,000 people.
See, I'm old enough to remember David Cameron making promises in that direction way back, way back at
Was
the very
that the
beginning.
tens of thousands?
Exactly.
Yeah. You've then had a period post-Brexit where migration, it's just gone to record levels. So there's a massive issue here for the Conservative Party. Like, you made a manifesto pledge, you have not just broken it, you've smashed through the barriers of it. It's agitating your supporters, and then you have this very visual symbol of uncontrolled immigration, the exact opposite of take back control, of migrants, asylum seekers coming across the channel in boats in their thousands, and it's really exploded as a problem in the past 3 to 4 years.
But the way in which this government has chosen to handle it is not by dealing with the issues in terms of processing asylum claims. It is not in terms of sorting out return agreements, agreements with other countries so you can send people back, although they have done that with Albania with some effect. Instead, they have promoted this Rwanda repatriation policy, deporting people to a foreign country if they arrive here illegally for their asylum claim to be processed there. And it has caused him problems, not just with the public, but also within his own party, and on both sides, the moderate side as much as the right.
It was interesting around the Rwanda vote. That was the second reading. That's effectively what that is the principle. Do you accept the principle of a piece of legislation, in this case, how to clamp down on illegal immigration and be able to send people to Rwanda? That vote, what was interesting was when he spoke to rebels the morning of the vote, as he was attempting to see off this rebellion, in that breakfast, as I understand it, he spent some of the time trying to blame predecessors for the problem he inherited, right? I don't know how well that went down in the room. I don't think they particularly appreciated this passing the buck to other people.
He was Chancellor at the time, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was Chancellor, and certainly Suella Braverman and her allies would say, well, we put forward lots of policies when you were Chancellor and then Prime Minister that you didn't want to accept. The point is, and this is what I think is, I think it's bad politics on Number 10's part, because he has somehow, by accident, I would hope, rather than design, because if it's by design, I'm totally confounded, has made a policy that he doesn't really know if he can deliver because it's beyond his control in some areas. The totemic policy now of his migration plan, when it's something that has irreconcilably divided his party, like Brexit did, between effectively left and right. So Leave, Remain, left and right of the party, all having a row about whether we pull out of human rights obligations internationally, right? And he's made this like his hill to die on. And I'm like, they might kill you. Why have you done that?
He can't satisfy everyone. Either, the right wing will vote it down when this returns to Parliament, it returns to the Commons, I should say, in January, or, the One Nation wets, moderates, will remember that they possess a spine and remind the Prime Minister of his commitments to international law.
And that's absolutely right. So he's got into a situation with this particular, and it's only one prong of the whole policy on immigration, be that clamping down on legal migration or illegal. He's made this one thing about getting flights off to Rwanda the symbol of all these policies, when it's only really a slither of the whole package. And I find this really curious, because actually by far the most successful element of this policy has been the returns agreement with Albania.
Yeah.
That has really helped drive down crossings. I mean, there's no silver bullet to this. There's so many layers of strategy. And you're right, like, in terms of where he is on getting the flights away, he's got a situation now where he comes back in the new year, and those that didn't rebel but have abstained are saying you need to strengthen this bill or we will vote it down, we will kill it off. And then the moderates on his party saying if you strengthen this bill in any way that threatens international obligations, we won't support it either, or they're threatening not to. It is a nightmare. It's a nightmare after Christmas.
And no doubt what happens, in 2024, the beginning of 2024, will have an effect on approval ratings, which right now, as I understand it, Rishi Sunak is polling worse right now than Boris Johnson did immediately before the party booted him.
Yeah.
Compare and contrast, though, with where Labour are at the moment, massively ahead in the polls. We can talk about Keir Starmer's kind of personal approval ratings, but the party is significantly ahead. Is that because people are appreciating the possibility that Labour could do things better? Or is it, pure and simple, Rishi Sunak fatigue, Conservative fatigue, do you think?
It's a good question, that, actually, Neil, because
they all are, Beth. They all are.
That's why he's in this business, everybody. He only does good questions. It's a combination of a few things, but if you boil it down to the very basics, I would say that this is not what I would say, actually. This is when you talk to politicians about what they think's going on, what do they think's going on the doorstep, is that when you talk to Conservatives, they say that just everyone is sick to death of us because we keep changing Prime Minister, we're rowing amongst ourselves.
As evidenced by the past few weeks.
And our voters, they're angry at us, so they're maybe not turning out. But some of them would argue they are still listening. So as long as they're angry with you, they're still engaged. What you don't want is when people don't care anymore, okay? But I think part of Labour's success is this argument for change. And that is not necessarily down to change to Keir Starmer. It's about a country that has had the Conservatives in power since 2010, now to 2023. Public services are under strain, as we can see. Brexit has delivered record levels of immigration when people perhaps voted for it for something completely opposite. And so I think that Labour are riding this wave of we are change.
Sure.
Now, when you drill down to the policies and it's like, how much change are you?
Yeah.
But polling around the conferences showed 4 out of 5 voters want change. And that's the problem for Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives. And that is the steal, if you like, for Keir Starmer.
I mean, no matter what the polls are saying, 20 points ahead and all the rest of it, it doesn't strike me that Keir Starmer is sitting back and taking victory for granted. In fact, he's actually putting some of his base on notice with some of the ways in which he has been trying to court, if not floating voters, then Conservatives who don't want more of the same. I mean, particularly the comments he was making not that long ago about Margaret Thatcher.
It's really interesting to see Keir Starmer, who I remember back in 2021. When was the election? I remember back, it was 2020. When he's trying to take over as leader of the party. He's very much a Corbynite back then, isn't he, Neil?
Of course he was. Of course he was. He defended him to the hilt. He was one of the few people that didn't leave the cabinet.
And then about a year later at party conference, the big question was, are you the heir to blame? You didn't want any of that. And now he's positioned himself as kind of, to Conservative voters, come to us, there's nothing to be afraid of. And yes, he referenced quite consciously in an op-ed, an article he wrote for The Telegraph, he praised Thatcher for her radicalism when it came to governing the country. And of course he praised Labour leaders too. But the point was, that to me was a continuation of the message of conference when he talked. He said, I'm making a direct appeal to lapsed Conservative voters. Try us out. You can trust me on security. You can trust me on economy. And Neil, he did a speech on the day that the government managed to get the Rwanda bill through to the next stage of voting in the Commons, where he kind of made the point, like, while they're all fighting, I'm the guy that's ready for government. And in the Q&A, he said that his mentality, and I thought this was so telling, was like, I am telling my shadow cabinet and all the people in my team think like we're 5 points behind. We go into this election like we're 5 points behind. And if he can pull it off with the party, what it creates is this discipline, right? Where they're not going to be knocked off course. And that, I think, has been a big strength of his. But I think the benefit of him, Neil, it's not really Kier, I would say. It's not Starmer necessarily. It's partly because people like Angie Rayner, John Ashworth, Pat McFadden, Bridget, they don't want to not be in government, so they'll do whatever it takes.
Yeah, but it's not those that he has to worry about, though, is it? It's the large chunk of his party that is not particularly happy with the stance that he has taken over Margaret Thatcher. The large chunk of his party that is not happy with the stance that he has taken over a ceasefire in the Israel-Gaza conflict.
But I think that for Starmer, having those internal fights in the party is not necessarily a bad thing when it comes to voters, right?
Is that what just usually happens within Labour? You've got the old school left, you've got the modernising centre, never the twin should meet except in a fight.
Historically, it was like, be that with Kinnock, be that with Blair and the Clause 4 moment, be that with Starmer now on anti-Semitism or Gaza. It's kind of like you almost have to sort of disown a chunk of your party or have a fight with them to prove to an electorate. And I would say in England, it's a small C country, small C conservative country, right? Path to victory for Labour, I don't need to tell you this, it always runs through Scotland, right? Because it's by its nature a more progressive, socially liberal, socially democratic country. He's got to, in a way, like Blair won on the centre, he feels he has to attack to the right. But I think in terms of the divisions in the party, sort of part of my themes as I think about going into elections about divisions on both sides. With the Conservatives, we've talked about divisions over immigration, divisions again between left and right, a fight for the soul of the party, that if they lose, do they move to a right-wing leader? Do they stay in the centre ground? All of this stuff. He's got divisions too, Starmer, between the centrists and those that are seeking power and the Blairites, if you like, and the left of the party. But the thing is, at the moment, he can just ignore the left. He can just, when he gets into power, if they win, depending on his majority, he might have a bit of a nightmare because there might be 50 strong. I mean, part of the problem, Neil, when they were worrying about people resigning over his stance on Gaza was they couldn't fill the jobs, right? He doesn't have enough MPs to fill the jobs.
Well, do you know what, Beth? Handily enough, coming up after the break, you and I are going to be talking about what is going on in Scotland and indeed whether or not there may well be an election to look forward to in 2024. We'll be back in a sec. Welcome back to this special edition of the Sky News Daily, where we have been taking a look back at the year 2023 in politics with, of course, our political editor, Beth Rigby. And as we were mentioning just before the break, Scotland does become incredibly important at this point in an electoral cycle. And it's been interesting, of course, watching what has been happening there, because the SNP have not been having it all their own way, despite the fact, of course, they have a new leader in the shape of Humza Yousaf.
I'm obsessed with Scotland. I mean, not only the people,
calm down, Beth.
The landscape, the person in front of me who is from Scotland. I am obsessed with Scottish politics at the moment because I think it's going to be so critical to the general election. Because if Starmer can really take seats in Scotland, the path to power to number 10 becomes so much easier for him. He doesn't have to win what are, as I was talking about, small C Conservative seats in England. And if you look back to all Labour governments, they've always done it through getting the bulk of the seats in Scotland. And then, of course, the SNP came along and they just built a stronghold there.
A remarkable force in British politics.
A remarkable force, and just killed Labour off in Scotland. And now what we're seeing is this resurgence of Labour. And it's going to be one of the key battlegrounds of the 2024, we think,
well,
election.
I don't think anyone north of Gretna Green is predicting that we will see Labour returning to kind of the pre-SNP highs, but they are going to take a chunk of seats, and I wonder given that, whether we might just see a bit of a renewed focus from Labour nationally, because we've had it a number of times referring to the branch office in Glasgow, which never particularly pleases those who are working on the doorsteps up there. But as you say, if there is a path to not just success, but a really resounding success come the next election, all roads do lead through Scotland.
I went back to have a look at some of the polling around Scotland. If you look at the graphs, from 2020 to now, you've got SNP here going downwards and you have Labour here going upwards, and they're not meeting yet in the middle.
No.
But goodness me, like SNP in 2020 are polling in their mid-40s. Labour is polling under 20%. And now you've got Labour around 30% and the SNP in the low 40s, right? So Labour are now looking at it. They've got 2 seats and they only just won one of those in a by-election. They won 1 seat out of, 59 in Scotland in the last general election. I mean, it's absolutely abysmal. But now they're looking at the idea that they could win 25 up to 30 seats.
It looks possible. So when then? When is this election going to be? Yeah, I don't like to put our correspondents or editors on the spot here, but it strikes me you get 2 options.
Well,
you've got spring, summer, or you've got autumn next year.
On the night of the budget, I had from a Conservative figure some information about at CCHQ, Conservative Campaign Headquarters, them being put on election footing from January the 1st. Like, you need to be election ready from January the 1st. And this kind of set the cat amongst the pigeons because everyone went, general election in May. So that was quite a sort of arresting moment. But within my analysis of that onto election footing is, yes, it could be in May, but there are many movable factors. And I think if you're guessing whether it is at the moment May, October, November, or even January 2025, which in various different programmes we've all discussed in recent months, you're a bit of a hostage to fortune. The reason I say that, Neil, is that I think a lot of it depends on polling, on the economy,
Rwanda bill,
and how it's looking for a Prime Minister. Now, if you talk to Labour strategists, they think it's coming in May. If you talk to people in Number 10, they will say, look, we're aiming for an autumn election. I think either could play out, Neil. And because think about it like this. If you're the Prime Minister and it gets to March, April next year and your Rwanda bill, it's going through and the economy is improving and the tax cuts from January have come in and your polling is narrowed from 20 points behind Labour to 10 points, you might think, I'm going to go now before I have local elections where I could do really badly, or I'll do Pond on the same day, and before we have another summer of boat crossings, for example.
Okay, fair enough. But what are the Conservatives' propensity for self-immolation? The idea that the Conservatives might, and because they have been talking about this, might elect another leader of the party and therefore Prime Minister. No, but then, it's not beyond the realms of possibility, which is insane.
Well, I think also the other discussion in all of that, right, is there's another scenario where there's an early election and it's from a position of even further weakness, not strength. So my scenario there about you decide as PM to go earlier than maybe you are planning for is because, the cards are in your favour. There's also a scenario whereby it gets really, really difficult for him next year. I mean, the polling is so bad. You talked about his favourability, right? The only person that has had worse favourability ratings than him is Liz Truss. I mean, they're really bad. Neil, they're really bad. And it was all the let Rishi be Rishi and we're going to stabilise the polls. It's the opposite. So what I'm saying is, say you have a scenario where he's stuck in the mud over Rwanda, the party's in open revolt, has a potential confidence issue where they either put the letters in to trigger a vote or he turns the Rwanda bill into a confidence issue. Your eyes have widened. Because
you're basically just telling me I'm not be able to take any holiday for the next 12
months.
We've
discussed it. Anyway, the point is you could see him just trigger an election and say, back me or sack me or I'm going to put it to the people. I have not booked any holiday in Easter. I'm not leaving the country until August, because they're not going to have try to go and canvass people in their summer holidays in August, and that is a sure way to lose their vote. So, but I'm not booking any holiday. Neil, have you?
No, I haven't.
That's good.
But that's
going to be doing this a lot.
We are, and I look forward to it. Well, Beth, wishing you all the best for 2024. Thanks for all your contributions in 2023. Hope you get a bit of time off yourself.
Thank you.
And that is your lot for this special political edition of the Sky News Daily. You can find out much, much more on everything that Beth was talking about there. Just scroll back through the podcast feed. We'll see you again soon.